We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast, brought to you by 7M Ventures and Andrew Wommack Ministries.
Hello and welcome to our Monday night Truth and Liberty broadcast. Man, this is going to be an exciting night. We don't have Karen Conrad with us. It's just Richard and me. We've lost the rose between two thorns, but we got the two thorns here. Anyway, this is Richard Harris, and he is the coordinator of our Practical Government School, and he also works in our 7M portion of the ministry, and he's our resident lawyer. And he's just been a super blessing to us, and I tell you, a wealth of information. So anyway, tonight we are going to be discussing a lot of the current events, and we've got some really important things to share. But before we do that, let me just say that you can go to truthandliberty.net. You could be watching on any of our Facebook feeds or any of the social media feeds, and you're welcome to do that. But we have had a few problems on them. I think that sometimes they censor us if we get a little bit too politically incorrect.
Yeah.
And so the best way so that you won't lose anything is just go to truthandliberty.net, and we will not censor ourselves. You'll get the entire broadcast.
For better or worse.
That's right. Also, let me announce that we've got the Heart of Christmas coming up. This is our Christmas musical that we're doing, and I tell you, it is phenomenal. It's going to be on the 7th through the 9th of December. And if at all possible, I would encourage you to come and participate in it. My wife is one of the leads in that. And I tell you, I know sometimes people think that, you know, Christian and musicals just don't go together very well. But this is awesome. Yeah. You've seen it, haven't you,
I've
Richard?
seen it several times. It's excellent.
Man, I've even been to nearly all of the rehearsals. And I tell people, if you can watch this without crying, I'll buy you a meal.
I was going to say, that finale always brings a tear to my eye.
It is awesome. Also, we've got a Gospel Truth seminar coming up in Phoenix, and Greg Fritz is going to be with me. And I don't know how many of you know Greg, but Greg has been traveling and ministering, I'm not even sure how long, probably 30 years or something like this. And he is one of the favorite speakers here at Charis Bible College. And he was just with me, I forgot where we were, someplace. But he spoke with me somewhere, and I tell you, it was powerful. And that's going to be the January the 3rd, 4th, and 5th at the Arizona Grand Resort and Spa in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been going to Arizona now every New Year's for many years, and it's just a great time. And they give you a special rate that if you would tell them that you were with the Andrew Wommack Ministries, they give you a special rate for 3 days before and 3 days after the event. So you could make this a vacation for yourself. It'd be a great, great time. Also, we have a giveaway, and tonight we're going to give away this teaching that I've got entitled, As I Have Loved You. And this is really a powerful teaching because this is taken from John chapter 13. You know, a lot of people quote where Jesus said that the greatest of all of the Old Testament commands is to love your neighbor as yourself. And even though that is true and that was appropriate at the time, he says, I'm giving you a new command, and that is that you love other people as I have loved you. And that's better than loving your neighbor as yourself.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that don't love themselves. But to love others the way that Christ has loved us is amazing. So anyway, this is a giveaway. The way you get the giveaway is to just sign up on our truthandliberty.net, and if you'll do that, you will automatically be in the running for this. And last week we gave away my teaching on Don't Limit God, and Nathan Miner is the one who won that. So we'll be sending that out to you soon, right away, Nathan. And if you would like to get in the running for As I Have Loved You, you need to go to our website and sign up, and we'll be sending that out. And also we send out notes. And Richard is the one that does most of our notes. And I forgot, you know how many pages this is, Richard?
Well, yeah, I didn't count them tonight, but I'd guess 50.
I'd say 50 pages of things. And we won't cover everything tonight. And so if you go to our website and sign up, we will send you these notes, and you can study them. And it's just a wealth of information. It's really, really good stuff. So you can interact with us. You can leave questions if you're on our website, truthandliberty.net. You can leave a question right there, or you can go to, I'm not sure about all of this stuff. Do you know?
Well, Yeah, they can.
Usually this is what Karen does.
Yeah, in the chat on our website.
See, I don't even know what
truthandliberty.net.
chat is. To me, we're chatting.
We're
right
chatting.
now.
Well,
I don't know, but anyway,
you just chat with your fingers.
if you would like to send us a question, we've already got some right here from Ruthie and from Bev and Judith, and we're going to be getting to those soon. We also have people watching that are in Hong Kong, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, Romania, India, Canada, and it looks like we have most of the states watching.
Awesome.
So anyway, welcome. Glad that you're with us. One last thing here that I'd like to say, that we do have people on our phones. Matter of fact, they're just right up above us right here, and our prayer ministers are answering the phones at 719-635-1111. And you can call and receive prayer. But also, we're going to be talking about a lot of things tonight. And as I said, Richard has documented all of these things, and he has a lot of information on this. If you want to get some of that, again, you can go to our website, but you could also call, and they will know how to direct you towards all of these things. And we will be discussing a lot of things. And if we mention Scripture or any of that, you can call, and they will be able to look up on the computer, and it'll bring up every time that I've ever taught on this in book form, printed form, CDs,
Wow.
or whatever, and they could just direct you towards materials that we have on that. So we are here to bless you. That number again is 719-635-1111. If you want to give, this is a viewer-supported ministry. It cost us, I think, around $2,500 every live cast that we do. You can text GIVE to 719-301-2552 to donate to Truth and Liberty. That's 719-301-2552, and it's going to be a blessing. So Richard, again, it's a blessing to have you here,
Well,
man.
it's such
I
an honor to
appreciate
be
it.
here.
And Richard, I'm going to kind of be the one who is the host, and we are going to let Richard spend a lot of time talking to you, because you got some things on your heart that you've been thinking about, and you really wanted to talk about. So what do you want to say?
Well, you know, Andrew, I thought it'd be a good time to talk about religious freedom. You know, last week was Thanksgiving, and we think, well, Thanksgiving, sometimes we think about the Pilgrims, and they came to America for the purpose of religious freedom. And I think that right now we're in a pretty important time in this country, because our religious freedom is really under assault more than ever in my lifetime.
You know, there's a lot of people that don't believe that. They just believe that there's isolated things, but I believe that it really is under assault from every area.
It definitely is. You know, Family Research Council, back in 2014, they published a book called, I think the title is Hostility to Religion. And we've put a link on the truthandliberty.net website where you can go to that link and then download a free copy of that report. But in 2014, they did a nationwide search and review, and they documented 90 cases where religious freedom, I mean a fundamental freedom in America, you would not think that you suffer religious persecution in this country, but they documented 90 cases where people's religious freedom had been oppressed in this nation. And then 3 years later, here's where it gets alarming, really alarming. They updated the report, and they found over 100 new cases in 3 years, or maybe it was 60. It was the 114% increase in 3 years.
Wow.
And that was in 2017. And by everything I'm seeing in the news accounts and so on, this is a major problem for us.
And you know, the sad thing is a lot of these things are being done through the courts.
Yeah.
And so once a precedent is set, it not only affects that one individual deal, but it sets a precedent.
That's exactly
We've
right.
experienced that right here in Woodland Park, because we had Tony Dungy come, and he was speaking at our men's conference, and one of his sons committed suicide, and so he goes around speaking about this, trying to, you know, encourage people not to take their own life. And the mayor of Woodland Park invited him to speak in the high school, because just the week before they had a boy that committed suicide. So they asked Tony Dungy to come and speak. And we've now got a new principal and a new superintendent. But at that time, the principal says, well, he can come, but he can't mention God and he can't speak about his faith, and that's religious persecution.
That absolutely
There is nothing anywhere in any legislation that says you cannot do that, but it is the perceived way that most people perceive it. And so there is persecution. We've experienced it right here.
Well, I just saw another, speaking of our backyard, down in Colorado Springs, at the University of Colorado Springs. There's a club, Christian Apologetics Club, and their rules require that their leaders be Christians. In other words, they agree to their statement of faith.
Sounds logical.
Yeah, you'd think so. Well, the university would not recognize that as a official student organization because they excluded people of other religious views. Well,
but if they had an atheist group, which they probably do, I bet you they exclude people who are fanatical Christians.
Well, I'm sure they do. Somebody said if you had a vegetarian group, would you allow meat eaters to be your leaders? It wouldn't make sense, would it?
No, it wouldn't.
But that might seem like a trivial thing, but when you multiply that all across the country and that mindset and that attitude, it's not trivial. And we have people that are being denied their religious freedom, throughout this country, and it's getting serious because with this LGBT movement that's going on, they're trying to seriously silence people. There was legislation introduced in California last year and also in Colorado. I expect that it'll be repeated now that Colorado's Senate has gone Democrat.
Well, not only Senate, but the House and the governor. It's a trifecta of Democrats in the state.
Yeah, but they introduced a bill to ban what they call conversion therapy, which is basically where pastors or counselors try to help people who are trying to get out of the homosexual lifestyle. Basically, sharing the gospel with them becomes illegal.
And even if they came and asked for help,
exactly,
it forbids that. You can't help a person if they request help.
That's right.
It's not talking about proselytizing or anything like that.
That's right. That's right.
And let me just cut through the chase here. I know that most people don't look at it this way, but there's a lot of people think, well, this issue over here, it's not really a religious issue. This is about tolerance. This is about treating everybody the same, and they disguise it. But I'm telling you, this is an anti-Christ movement. Political correctness is nothing but anti-Christ. The Scripture says that the spirit of Antichrist is already at work. And this is an attack. If you strip back all of the layers, it's kind of like an onion or a head of lettuce. If you just keep peeling it back and you get to the core, the thing that motivates all of this is that people do not like the morality that is promoted through the Bible. They are against that. They feel convicted of their own conscience, and this is an attack against all morality. Yeah. And that's the reason that it's so hypocritical. Because let me just bring up a current issue, but the border issue is a big deal today.
Right.
And they just, I think, was it yesterday that they had people that stormed the border down there in California, and Trump had some people shoot tear gas at them to repel them. And they are all up in arms talking about, one of them even said that this is chemical warfare. Did you hear that?
I did, yeah.
They retracted it, but that just shows you how little they know.
They have gone off the rails,
anything. But anyway, they said it's chemical warfare, and they were just outraged. And yet Obama did the exact same thing. He had them attacked with pepper spray because they did the exact same thing back during his administration at the same place. Yeah. And they repelled it with pepper spray, and there wasn't a single outcry against that. But because the conservative president is in, it's just an attack against conservatism, but it's really not conservative versus liberal. It's moral versus immoral.
That's right.
It really is. And the Democrats, I know that some people will be put off by this, but the Democrats have just sold themselves out to absolute immorality.
They have. They've embraced homosexuality wholeheartedly. And you can't even bring up the question of whether it's wrong or not, or whether it's a destructive lifestyle, without being labeled a racist and a bigot and all these things. And
it's not just homosexuality. You were telling me about a woman in Europe who said something against Muslims.
That's right.
What was that?
Well, there was a woman, and I think she was in Germany, but don't quote me on what country she was in, but she was speaking about Muhammad and the history of Islam, and she said Muhammad is a pedophile.
Which is accurate.
It's a historically fact. I mean, Muslims won't even argue with the fact that he married a 6-year-old girl and then consummated the marriage at the age when she was 9. Well, that is by definition, pedophilia. So she said that, and then she was prosecuted for slandering another religion. And she defended herself on the ground of freedom of religion, and the European Union highest court held that no, she did not have the freedom to say such a thing about Islam, because the rights of Muslims not to be offended was more important than her right to speak the truth.
And
That's
they will
dangerous.
disguise this as we are not into hate speech, is what they'll
that's
call
what they call it.
But the truth is, it's not about hate speech. It's about moral versus immoral, godly versus ungodly, and it's amazing to me how they've somehow or another turned this around and call us the ones who are bigots, when the truth is they are so intolerant.
That's exactly
An
right.
example of that, can't even sit there and say the truth. You have to rewrite and redefine history to fit their narrative.
It reminds me, where's that scripture, Andrew? You'll know this, but it's in the New Testament somewhere, I think, where Paul says they were not lovers of the truth, talking about the end times. And,
2 Thessalonians chapter 2, I believe it's verse 10.
There you go. You're better than Google. Anyway, but that's what we're in right now. I think people, they don't love the truth. They just want power.
And it says because they loved not the truth, he sent them a strong delusion that they might believe a lie and all be damned.
Yes.
And that's the only justification that that's the only way I can understand what we're going through, because people today, they can't see the hypocrisy in this.
That's right.
We were talking about the borders again, and I think I brought this up last week, but they're sitting there saying that we need to be embracing these people, not shooting tear gas at them and things like this. And it's total hypocrisy, because the people who are saying that, they aren't going and getting the homeless and bringing them into their home and letting them camp out on their yard and giving them their food and letting them take their shower in their shower.
Yeah.
See, that's just total hypocrisy. And yet somehow or another, they believe that they are being consistent. It's a strong delusion.
It is a strong delusion, because I think they're deceived by their own lust for power. And they're in truth, they're more concerned about winning. We saw this in the Judge Kavanaugh hearings in spades. They're more interested in getting their way than they are about getting to the truth. That's why they didn't care about due process with Judge Kavanaugh. That's why they don't care about the hypocrisy of their position on immigration or whatever. If it suits their needs, if it gets their cause, their party, their tribe advanced, then they're going to embrace it.
Well, they even said, before there was any questions directed at Judge Kavanaugh, they even said, we will do whatever it takes to oppose this. They weren't going to let facts get in the way of anything that they wanted to do.
That's exactly right.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it is. But I was thinking about this. I mentioned that law that got proposed out in California, and then it had already come up in Colorado. And we had one vote advantage in the Senate that was able to stop it. But this anti-conversion therapy law to make it a crime, and I was thinking about that and how drastic that is. And then I got to thinking about the history of this whole LGBT movement. And they started off by saying, first it was politically incorrect, you remember? And then they said we're homophobic. And then it became free, civil unions became the law. And then there was hate speech, and then hate crimes, and it's a little by little. Then finally we have gay marriage. They didn't get it passed through Republican process. They forced it down our throats through the Supreme Court. And now they're trying to tell the church what we can do and what we can't do, what we can say and we can't say. And if that's not the spirit of Antichrist, then I don't know what is.
You would probably be able to quote this, but it was Jefferson that said that if democracy was ever destroyed, it would probably be through the courts.
Yeah.
And it would come little by little as we gave more and more authority to the courts.
Yeah.
And then we had, who was it? Was it Mike Ferris that was with us at
at the event?
At the event. And Mike Ferris really put it, I love the way he put it.
Perfect.
He says that the Supreme Court, 9 unelected men forced on the American public what they could have never have done. It was against the majority of the people's wish for homosexual unions to be done. And so the Supreme Court is way out of control.
Way out of control.
And you being a lawyer probably understand that much more than most of us.
I do. I could give you a long history of it, but it has to do with with the idea that was invented back in the turn of the last century. But the idea was, oh, this Constitution, it doesn't necessarily mean what it says because it's a living document. And that means that it changes with the times. The times don't change to fit the Constitution. We're going to change the Constitution as we see fit. The problem with that is the people aren't making the change. It's these judges who think they know better, and they're going to be the arbiters of what is right and wrong and changing society from their benches with their black robes. And it's the most un-Republican, ungodly thing, and that's where we've lost our freedom, is right there. And that's why President Trump and his appointments are so incredibly important right now.
We had Bill Federer on our program a couple of weeks ago, and I interviewed him on my television program, and it'll be airing, I'm not sure, but sometime January or something like that.
Yeah.
And anyway, I asked him about the First Amendment and what it really was meant to say.
Right.
And it was 40 minutes
I bet he
later.
went off on that,
But
didn't
he started back in the 500s with Muslim rule and how it nearly took over Europe, and then as a result, the King of Spain started doing some things, and that caused each one of these countries to have their own religious segment.
Right.
There was the Puritans and the Separatists, and there was the Lutheran Presbyterians, the Anglicans, and he went through all this history, and they came to the States, and they were first divided into these, the colonies. Each one had their own religious culture, except I think, Pennsylvania?
Well, they were Quakers. Pennsylvania.
Well, there was one of them that embraced everybody.
Oh, they had the.
It was the most
started off
liberal.
with the most. Yeah, the most open.
But most of them, like Rhode Island, I think was Baptist. And so anyway, he went through all this history to show the division, and the reason for the First Amendment was not to say that government and religion had to be totally separated, but that they did not want the government imposing a national religion the way it had been in all of these European states.
That's right.
And so anyway, that's what that was all about. And yet these liberal judges have been interpreting it completely opposite from what it was historically done.
The Supreme Court, their case law in the modern era says that the First Amendment means that government has to be neutral between religion and non-religion.
Which basically elevates non-religion to a religion.
Well, it does, but it also means that non-religion always wins. Right? Because you can't be neutral. It's impossible. If you push all religion out, non-religion wins. So atheism wins, secularism wins.
And again, if you go back to history, we were discussing this before the broadcast began, but every single state constitution of the 13 colonies, you had to profess faith in the Lord Jesus Christ to hold office.
Right.
If you were not a professing Christian, you could not be elected to any office.
And that's because the founders knew that without faith in God, and as they called it back then, a future state of rewards and punishment, there's nothing to hold you accountable for your decisions in this life. And they wanted people to know who were holding office that what you do, you're going to give account for.
Yeah. And you would know this man's name, but I think he was a Frenchman who came over in the 1800s and tried to figure out why America was exceptional.
Alexis de Tocqueville.
There you go.
Yeah.
And anyway, he basically was saying that he was shocked and surprised how religious America was, and his conclusion was that the reason that America's revolution worked was because we had faith in God, which gave personal accountability, and the French Revolution turned into anarchy and was a bloodbath because they were atheistic and didn't have any self-control. There was no moral restraints on them.
That's right.
And that's the reason that America has survived and prospered, is because of our morality and faith in God.
That is such a huge and important point. The First Amendment has 5 rights in it: religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. So religion and speech are the first of the first of the first. They are the most important. John Adams said, I think, that our Constitution is made for a moral and religious people, and it's wholly inadequate for any other. You see, it was designed for self-government, and people without God, without faith in God, can't rule themselves. They're going to be left to their passions and lusts, and that's what we're seeing today. generations now have been raised in secular schools where they're not allowed to talk about God, where they're taught that they're an accident and they came out of some soup. Well, what's the purpose of life? Who am I? Who cares? What's right is what's right for me. Moral relativism and all of that. So,
and in order to get this ungodly attitude across, they're rewriting history.
Absolutely.
And, I just heard something, I think it was yesterday or the day before, but they were talking about, turkey being associated with Thanksgiving. And they said the Pilgrims didn't have turkey. Well, it was something else. I just read one of the Bill Federer minutes, and they had, I forgot how, they did have venison and things besides turkey, but they had a slew of turkeys. But see, people are just rewriting it and saying everything that we've ever been taught is wrong, and they're trying to pull the rug out from under people so that they can just re-educate them however they want it.
That's absolutely right, historical revisionism. I was thinking, I know you might find it weird the things I think about, but there's a book, there's a book that came out that's had a lot of influence, and it's called The Godless Constitution. And I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or whatever, by these academic professors, and they wrote this whole book about how the U.S. Constitution doesn't mention God, is completely secular and all this. And then at the end they have a little thing that says, we've dispensed with the usual scholarly apparatus of footnotes. They give no support at all. How convenient, right? But they're going to say what they need to say to get their ideology indoctrinated into our kids.
Well, I've heard David Barton say this again. You could probably give the exact book, but there was a book written in the early 1900s that came out and challenged all of these things, and it had no footnotes. And yet people just have used that since that time as an example of to rewrite all this history.
Yeah, well, that's why people like David Barton and Bill Federer are so important to what we're trying to accomplish here in this country. They're giving us the facts and the true history of this nation, and that we've almost lost. But thank God for what they're doing, and what we're trying to do here is to rebuild that.
And Richard, I've heard that there are like 51% of millennials that are embracing socialism, communism, that they think it's a positive thing.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to comment on the Pilgrims, because in a sense, they tried socialism.
Yeah, they did. And it took them about 6 months, I think, to figure out that it doesn't work. Because what they noticed in a short amount of time is that people were freeloading. It was a share and share like deal where everybody put all the corn and all the turkeys or whatever they caught into the pool, and then everybody got to take what they wanted. But they found out that it encouraged idleness, and people were not working as hard and eating more than their fair share. And it didn't take long before William Bradford announced, we're not going to do that anymore. Everyone's going to eat what he kills, and this is the scriptural way, is what he observed. And after that is when they began to prosper.
And I even read that William Bradford said that the young men who were strong and could work were winding up feeding everybody else, because there were so many people sick and things like this, and they lost their incentive because they were working their fingers to the bone, and other people were doing nothing and getting the same slice that they were. And then there were also women who were having to cook for all of the other people and do all of the laundry. And so anyway, that's when they decided that this socialism isn't working, that they gave everybody their own plot of ground and allowed them to work, and by the second year that it came around, they were prospering and had more than enough.
Yeah. Audrey Mack was here recently, and she actually preached to our church, and she said she comes from France, where they have a socialist government, and she said that socialism makes people passive. And she remembers when she came to America the first time, and she could literally breathe in the freedom and how much she loved it. But that comment made a lot of sense to me. It's just kind of common sense, isn't it? You're not going to work as hard if someone else is going to provide for you. And I think, right now, the problem with millennials, and this is an overgeneralization, but they're being educated in a system that doesn't tell them the whole history and the whole truth about socialism. But if you look at history, socialism and communism has been a complete and utter failure. Where liberals like to point is to certain countries like Norway and Denmark and so forth, But those countries, there's reasons why they're doing okay still, but eventually that system is going to catch up
Well,
with
in
even them.
Norway, they got a lot of oil,
They
and
have
they got
oil,
things
natural
right
resources,
now.
yeah.
Let me give you this. This is something that Bill Federer sent me, and I just love this. You
Okay.
may have heard it before. But here's a way of describing socialism, communism, fascism, and capitalism. Have you
Okay.
heard this?
I don't think so.
The two cow.
No, I haven't.
All right, here's socialism. If you have two cows, the government takes one and gives it to your neighbor. Communism, you have two cows, you give them to the government, and the government then gives you some milk. Fascism, you have two cows, you give them to the government, and the government then sells you some milk. Capitalism, you have two cows, you sell one and buy a bull and create a herd.
There you go.
Nazism, you have two cows, the government takes both and shoots you. I thought that was awesome.
That's good.
But this really does illustrate that socialism is where you have everything common, but
Yeah.
it does not work. It takes away self-incentive, and this is opposed to what the Bible taught.
That's right.
Man, the Bible did not do communism at all. Matter of fact, did you know that the first century church, they thought that the Lord was just returning any day. And so after Jesus rose from the dead, they sold all things and had all things common and shared it. And some people use that as an example of like a communal system and being a godly thing. But did you know in a very short period of time, Paul had to take up a collection for the poor saints at Jerusalem because they had sold all of their goods and they were living in a communal thing. And within just a decade or so, they were absolutely broke.
I never put those two things together. That's amazing.
And so even though it was a good desire that they loved each other enough that I want to share everything, it was a failed system. It failed in the Bible. It has failed. There isn't a single example of socialism working.
No.
Not a one.
No, it doesn't work. You know, America is the most productive nation in the world. Our productivity rates pass all those of Europe. You know, the Europeans, I've noticed when they come here, they're impressed by and kind of, I think, alarmed by the American work ethic. But in America, we work hard. We work hard because it's on us. We know that our own prosperity depends on us. No one's going to give me a handout. No one's going to give me what I need to take care of my family, you know. But that's the scriptural way, and it causes people to be more productive, more creative too. You know, most of the inventions, most of the technological advances of the world in medicine, in science, in even art and literature are disproportionately come from America. And it's not because Americans are born great, it's because of the culture and the values that we have that come out of the Bible. And
do you know the exact comparison between the American economy and like China, which is the second largest? I've heard it's something like China is 1/20th the size of the American economy?
Right. It's completely, we think they're this huge economy, which they are, but
compared to the
compared
US,
to America,
we are like what, 5% of the world's population, and we have
4%.
like 90% or something of the world's wealth.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is disproportional, and yet, see, when you talk about America is the world's largest economy, people think, well, yeah, but China's right there. No, it's like 1/20th as much. Now, I may get the thing wrong, but the comparison remains that there is nobody that can hold a candle to us.
No.
And that's the reason that I think that if Trump is free to negotiate, he will eventually win, because there's no way that the Chinese economy can handle things the way that the U.S.
That's
economy
what I
can.
think too, Andrew. I think the Chinese have a whole lot more to lose on this trade situation than the United States does. We'll get through it and prosper and find markets elsewhere, but China's totally dependent on the U.S. buying their stuff. And so, you know, I hope that the president is able to stand his ground and work out a deal that's fair.
The only advantage that the Chinese have over the U.S. is that they don't listen to their people, and they don't care if the people starve to death.
That's true.
And so they could hold out until, you know, the elite are struggling.
Yeah.
Whereas in the U.S., man, we are responsive to the people, and if the people are throwing a fit, it will hinder what we can do to negotiate.
That's right.
All right, so let's go to some questions here. Here was a great question. It says, does Truth and Liberty Coalition, after so many broadcasts, now have a formal list of local pastors and churches across our nation that have signed and that have aligned with Truth and Liberty?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think we have a formal list of pastors.
But you know what? I was thinking this would be an awesome thing to do.
That's a really good idea. Maybe we should start one.
So anyway, the answer is I don't think we do. But you know what? We will take that under advisement. I think that would be a great thing to do, is to find, you could go to Truth and Liberty and find churches that are aligned with these conservative type views. And I think that would be a great resource for people. Here's another one. This is from Scott. Let's see, where did Scott go? Here it is. Scott Poteet from chat says, how can Christians run for office in this environment? Should we be clandestine about our beliefs?
Well, I don't think so. No, Christians can run for office still and should run for office. And it's a great platform to be able to demonstrate the gospel and share the truth that, the scriptural truths, that we need to. So I don't think being clandestine is the answer. In fact, if you look at the history of politics in the last 30 years, 40 years or whatever, it seems like the moderate Republicans and the mainstream media are always telling Republicans, oh, you got to go to the middle, you got to moderate. And whenever Republicans do that, they lose. We just saw that here in Colorado, where they nominated a moderate Republican against a left-wing Democrat, and the left-wing Democrat won the governor's race.
And they had some very conservative Republicans that they could have put in there, but they went with the moderate and lost.
That's right.
And Trump is a great example of this, because Trump just came out. I mean, he said things that nobody else would say, and man, he won.
Yeah. He fired up people who think the way he thinks and believe in traditional values. And finally, someone who's looks like they've got the backbone to stand up for what I believe in.
We have a divided country.
We do.
More so probably than I've ever seen in my lifetime. But I still believe that the vast majority of Americans are conservative.
Yeah.
Or they at least lean conservative in their beliefs. If you look at a map of the red and the blue states, I mean, really, the blue, it's just nearly the red nearly dominates everything. Yeah. It's just pockets where the blue are, and it so happens that those are some of the larger population centers that have a large electoral college thing. But conservatism is not out of style. It'll win. Matter of fact, again, I wished I had the details. You might be able to remember this, but during the midterm elections, all of the people that supported Trump and stuff and were vocal and stood out for him, they won. The ones who distanced themselves from, the Republicans who distanced themselves from Trump are the ones that lost. And I believe that that was a referendum on the fact that people approved of what Trump was doing. Now, it may look on the surface like the Democrats gained some seats in the House and stuff because of it, but really it was a vote against these rhinos, Republicans and name only Republicans, and the people were upset with it, and they want somebody who'll stand.
Well, you got to give people something to believe in, don't you?
Absolutely.
Something to motivate them.
All right, here's another one. Ron B. on chat said, Romans 1:28 speaks of a reprobate mind. Do you think this explains the current action of the left?
It's hard to classify such a huge number of people as reprobate, but I think that culturally speaking, there are segments of our society that are becoming reprobate. And, I don't want to be doomsday-ish, but, if you look at history, there's never been a nation that has embraced homosexuality and survived. Never.
Absolutely.
And it's the line that once you cross, it's like the mind of the culture becomes so degenerate that there's no pulling back from there, no recovery from there. So I'm believing that we're not there yet as a nation. Like Andrew was saying, because there's such a large segment of our country that is still Christian and is still conservative, and we need to continue to stand up for the truth and to preach the gospel and to share the love of Christ with everybody, no matter their political beliefs. But and I believe if we do that with faith in God and prayer, that we're going to prevail in this thing.
Amen. Awesome. All right, here's another question. Says, what was the religious climate in Europe that made people from England come to New England? And how does that climate compare to the religious climate in America today?
Well, that's another good question. The religious climate in England was one of persecution. Now, in England it wasn't atheists and homosexuals, but nevertheless, what had happened was the Word of God began to be printed, and then it began to be translated out of Latin, I'm talking about the Bible, into people's native languages in the 1500s. People like John Wycliffe and who's the other guy? William Tyndale, who were martyred because they dared to put the Bible into English.
Yeah.
And when people began to get their hands on the Word of God and read it for themselves, well, miraculous stuff started happening. They started getting born again and saved and falling in love with Jesus and filled with the Holy Spirit. And then they turn around and they look at the church in England and they're going, wait a second, this isn't what the Bible says. This isn't how we're supposed to worship. We're not talking to saints and stuff like that and all these ceremonies and priests and whatnot. And they became dissenters. And when they dissented, the church that was run by the king and the queen didn't like that because it was a threat to them. So they persecuted them and they passed the religious uniformity law and started throwing them in prison and saying, you can't hold Bible studies in your homes, you can't meet in private, you can only hold church in church with the approval of the pastor or whatever they called him, the bishop. And over time it became so severe that they decided they had to get out. And they eventually they went to Holland, and then King James pursued them there, found them, and sent secret agents who destroyed their printing presses and brought some of them back to England and so on. And they decided at that point that they needed to go somewhere else where they could build the Christian society that they felt like God was calling them to build. These are the Pilgrims. And they rented 2 ships from England, the Mayflower and the Speedwell. I heard Bill Federer say the Speedwell didn't speed very well. It sprung a leak and they had to go back. And eventually it was just the Mayflower that crossed the Atlantic Ocean in 1620. And it got blown off course and they landed in Massachusetts. They were headed for Virginia, but they got blown off course and they landed in Massachusetts in November of 1620. And so it was there for the first time in all of world history that a group of true Christians, believers, born-again people, had an opportunity to found a Christian society and a Christian government. And that, folks, that's the real history of America. That's the origins of this nation.
Yeah, and let me just point out that, again, revisionist history is trying to say that, no, it was government oppression, it was all of these kind of things, and they try and secularize it, that it wasn't really that religious. But it was exactly as you've described.
Yeah.
It was the translation of the Word of God into a language that sparked a revival.
Exactly.
And these people came here directly for religious freedom.
Exactly.
And that is exactly what is under attack. That's the first thing we started talking about tonight. And that's the reason that if you come against our religious freedoms, well, then everything that the United States is based upon falls.
That's right.
Now, anybody who disagrees with that, you're entitled to your opinion, but I'm not going to agree with you or we'd both be wrong. I'm telling you, that is the truth. This is a republic that was founded because of religious freedom. Right. And to take that away is tearing the heart and the soul out of everything that America is.
That's right.
And whether people realize it or not, today that's exactly what they're doing. They're attacking the very root and foundation.
That's right. You know, the Declaration of Independence says it. It says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And if we reject God, we reject the idea that our rights come from God, then where do our rights come from and what are they? They're whatever the government says they are. Mm-hmm. And if man can give you your rights, man can take your rights away. And that's where we do not want to go. Because then our rights are not secure.
Here's another question from Michael on Facebook. Says, why can't the church come together in the unity of the faith and love of Christ? Why do men and women of God believe it is the government's job to take care of us?
Boy, Andrew, that'd be a good one for you to talk about.
Well, I just happen to have an answer on it. And you know, again, we had Bill Federer on here, and I learned from him that back during the founding of this nation, before it was a nation, when it was just colonies, we all came here for different religious freedoms. And again, there was the Baptist, I think, that was in Rhode Island and New Jersey. There was the Presbyterians. There was all of these different groups. And these different colonies would not cooperate. There was division, big time. But when we got into a war, it was unite or die. And so we united, and that's the reason that we came together and established that no making no laws concerning the establishment of religion,
Right.
it wasn't to take the government out. It was so that the government wouldn't establish just, the
A single
Baptist religion.
denomination,
Right?
yeah.
A denomination. So anyway, going back to this question, this is not something new. This is something that the colonies had at the very beginning. Right. All of this division and everybody just dealing with their own thing. And I think that it's going to take basically coming to the precipice of another disaster before Christians are going to unite. I think we're seeing it some now.
Yeah.
I really do.
It's starting.
I think we're in the beginning of some things that if the Lord tarries and it continues, I think this could be a revival, and we could be talking about these are the beginning stages of it. But most people don't recognize a revival until 100 years after the fact, and they see what happened. But anyway, that question from Michael, I think that it's a shame that the church hasn't united and hasn't stood up. But there's a lot of people that are just refusing to take the heat.
Yeah, yeah. They're more concerned about filling their pews than they are about preaching the truth. Some of them. That's a harsh thing to say.
Did you know I just got an email today on security measures that we need to take at our new building over here, and they said because you are having truth and liberty and doing these things, we need to put things on the windows to protect them. We need to and it's sad to say, but you know what? You have to think about those kind of things, and there's a lot of ministers that just do not want to do that.
Yeah.
But it costs you something to stand up. We need to stand up.
We need to, while we can.
And here's Ruthie. She's always with us. Thank you, Ruthie, for being here. And hers was the first question. It says, when the Puritans and Separatists came to America, did they come to worship God in any way they desired without having to fear punishment, prosecution from going against church rules? Or did they come to practice whatever religion they wanted? Did the original meaning of freedom of religion truthfully include all religions or just Christianity?
Well, Ruthie, that's a really great question. Sometimes when we look at history, we forget to put ourselves in the context of the situation. And when the Pilgrims got here in 1620, it was another 150 years before the Declaration of Independence. Over that time period, additional colonies are started and formed, and like Andrew was saying, some of them were Baptists, some of them were Presbyterian, some of them were Anglican, Quakers, and so on. So if you look at the history of the colonies, you see friction between these different denominations, and sometimes those, like the original Puritans, they come and they want religious freedom from themselves, but when it comes to extending to other people, maybe they're a little bit, reticent to do that. But over time, the colonists, as they worked these issues out, they came more and more strongly to understand in the fundamental importance of religious freedom for all. And most importantly, it was, and in the biggest view, it was freedom for any Christian denomination to function and flourish, regardless of their disagreements. Eventually that was extended to Catholics and to Jewish faiths and ultimately Muslims. But like Andrew was saying, in the early days they understood that, wait a second, this is a Christian nation, and you have to have a certain amount of faith in God and the Scriptures even to hold office or to own property or to vote. So, there were some limitations on that.
And it's my understanding of history that they were separated before the Revolution, but the Revolution forced them to stand together. They saw that the only way they were going to survive was to embrace all of Christianity, not just a certain group and stuff like that. So it was in the coming together of these churches that really sparked the nation.
That's right.
Well, and it's going to be the same thing today. If we preserve this nation, we're going to have to come together.
We absolutely are. No question about it.
Absolutely. Here's another one. Says, Bev on Facebook says, could you comment whether or not the churches will one day need to give up their 501c3 status?
Oh, that's a great one. That's a good question.
You say that about every question.
I do. You say that to all the questions. Well, I say no. Because a church is already exempt from income tax as a matter of historical and constitutional right. You don't have to, as a church, you don't have to be 501c3 to be tax exempt. Churches apply for 501c3 status because it gives them that sort of stamp of approval. They can then use it to raise funds, but it's not legally mandatory in order to be tax exempt. Now, for other Christian ministries, they do have to do that to be tax exempt. But having said that, will the time come when we're going to have to make a choice? And I'm going to say by faith that no, but there's a footnote to that, which is what we've been talking about here. The church has got to rise up and take its place. We have to begin, and I think we are beginning, but we've got to push back. We've got to fight for our freedom and fight for the freedom to preach the gospel and to stand up for what's right and what's wrong. And to the extent we do that and are bold, then we're going to preserve our freedom. And if we don't do that, then I think the chances are pretty good that we're going to lose our freedom. So it is a very serious situation.
Let me just say from the standpoint of a minister who is not a church and has to have a 501c3, that I appreciate the fact that the government has given us this because it saves us a lot of money. Yeah. But you know what? It's not going to affect what I do. Mm-hmm. I will prosper if I lost it. I am not going to sit there and compromise my beliefs or anything I'm doing because I'm being held ransom for the 501c3. I think that is very immature. Now, that's not to say that it's not worth fighting for, because it is a benefit to the church. But say, for instance, if you had a ministry and if I felt led to give to you, I'd give to you whether I get anything back from it or not.
Right.
Matter of fact, when I go to places, when Jamie's with me, we have a give account. And we give out of that give account. And we put a minimum of 25% of everything we get in that give account. Sometimes we've given as much as 90% of our yearly income into ministries and stuff. So that's not all that we do. But when Jamie's with me, she'll always write a check and we deduct it from our taxes. But when I'm someplace, I give thousands and thousands of dollars and I never get a receipt for anything. Because we give more than what they will give us back in deductions. And so it's never a factor with me, and I wouldn't not give because I wasn't going to get a tax deductible receipt.
Yeah.
So I think that people have depended on this more than what they should. Yeah, you ought to do what's right regardless.
Well, it's kind of one of those Trojan horse things where, that whole tax exempt status got into the church and now people are in love with it. And that's why we respect you so much, Andrew, is your conviction. And I think you've got a teaching on preparing your heart, And I think pastors and ministers, whether you're a pastor of a church or you have a parachurch ministry, may need to be preparing your heart about this issue. And where do you stand on this? It's not worth sacrificing the truth and the gospel just to get that tax exempt status. It's like you said, God is able, isn't He? He's able to provide. Absolutely. Whether the federal government makes you pay tax or not.
I guarantee my tax exempt status is not what has blessed me.
Amen. No, it didn't build this new building, did it?
No, it didn't. All right, here's another question from chat. It says some news sources are saying that the border situation today is proof that a border wall is not needed. What do you think about that?
Did I hear that question right?
They're saying basically that the border situation today is proof that a border wall isn't needed. So I'm assuming that they're saying that we could enforce the borders as they're doing right now without a border wall.
Yeah, by sending 5,000 troops to the border and spraying people with tear gas. I think it's proof that a border wall is absolutely needed.
Just the opposite.
The Caravan never would have come up here if we'd had a wall.
I bet you these news sources that they're talking about must be Democratic.
It must be CNN fake news, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of those things. They've got a strong delusion.
Yes, they do. That made no sense to me. I'm sorry.
No, and plus the border is so long that there's places that it's impossible to police. It's impossible to put enough troops. You'd have to put a standing army there. And again, the confrontation between people, something's going to escalate. When you have a wall, it's a lot easier.
That's another example, I'm sorry, of, if I could just be honest, of hypocrisy. The same liberals that are saying, oh, see, you don't need a wall, are the same ones who are saying, well, we're not going to spend money on immigration enforcement and on adding more border patrol police, which is what you'd have to do without a wall.
Yeah.
So, no, that's a ruse. I'm sorry.
I tell you what, we need borders.
We do.
That's just crazy. All right, here's another one. It says, have any of these migrants been allowed in, or are they still being held? Why did judges have the right to overturn Trump's choice to ban them?
Well, two questions there. The first one, have any of them been allowed in? And yes, they have. I think through the normal, those who've come through ports of call, as they're called, border entry points, they're being allowed in, and their asylum applications, are being processed, I guess. I have no idea what the number is on that. I suspect there's some that have made it over illegally. There's no way to keep all of them out.
Well, over the weekend they had a mass thing that ran for the border. Did any of those get through?
No, that one that made the news, I don't think they did it, but how many have done it without being noticed, is what I'm saying. And to answer the second question, there's laws on asylum, right? What are the rights, the conditions when we'll give asylum, and that law happens to say that people can apply for asylum regardless of where they enter the country. And so Trump's declaration that he wasn't going to allow these migrants to seek asylum unless they come through a border entry point, a judge out in San Francisco said, well, that's clearly against that law, and Mr. President, you can't make the law. Well,
and he called him out on the fact that it's the Ninth Circuit.
Yeah, he said it's an Obama judge.
Yeah.
Which
is true.
It's true. Yeah.
And you know that Schumer and who was it? One of the Supreme Court judges that
Roberts.
Yeah, Roberts. Anyway, Schumer said something about, I usually don't agree with Republican-appointed judges, but in this case he's right, that there are no liberal or conservative judges. But the very fact that he said that shows that he called Roberts a conservative.
In one sentence, he spoke out of both sides of his mouth.
Anyway, it's weird.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. But you know what? Again, I want to encourage you to go to truthandliberty.net, and you can get these 50 pages of notes and stuff that Richard has been talking about tonight. Plus, we still have people on our phones, 719-635-1111. And if you need prayer, if God has spoken to you, convicted you about something tonight, and you would like someone to pray with you, we would love to pray with you. And they will be there until about, I think, 9:30 Mountain Time. That's 719-635-1111. Also, if you would like to give and support this, we are reaching a lot of people. We usually have anywhere from 10 to 20,000 people. We've got multiple nations, all of the states represented. You can give by texting GIVE to 719-301-2552. That's 719-301-2552. And remember that we do this every Monday night. And we have guests on lots of times. Last week we had Lance Wall. Now we've had generals on, politicians. It's just been an awesome time. And we've got our own resident lawyer, Richard Harris. He's a blessing. So awesome. Anyway, we appreciate you joining us tonight. Make sure that you join us again next week for another Truth and Liberty broadcast right here at 6 p.m.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net.